And I'll give the floor to Laure. We'll talk about the agenda for today and tomorrow. Thank you, Mrs. President of the International Committee of the Red Cross, and reminded us our duty to comply with the international law, the law of war and humanitarian law during wars. And we also talk about double standards, and is also essential. And we saw in the past how it can be a trap. But when we talk about double standards, we feel the need to understand if we can compare two situations. And also, I think it's part of the equation. Are we in similar situations? We talk about Israel and Ukraine. And it's true that the problems exist, and you actually talked about all these problems. But dear friends, dear President, Mr. Prime Minister Cazeneuve, dear Karin, dear friends, it's a pleasure and an honor to see you all gathered here in this room for the 7th session of the Tocqueville discussions. It's a project we launched just after the first election of Trump. And we get the feeling with the Figaro and the Tocqueville family. We consider that we're facing a severe crisis, and Trump was only a symptom. And we consider that it was important to create a polite and friendly discussion between the both sides of the Atlantic Ocean. And now we have the second election of Donald Trump, and once again he shook the alliance, the Atlantic Alliance, to the core. And now we have the 7th session, and as Jean-Guillaume said, we have a very rich agenda and truly fascinating agenda. And I would like to highlight the richness of the content and the speeches, and the very interesting speakers came from the Netherlands, from Ukraine, from Lithuania, and I'll probably forget many of them. I would like to thank you all for coming, and Jean-Guillaume thanks everyone. But I wanted to tell you that we have the pleasure of having the European Commissioner for Defense, and Mr. Kubilius, and we also have the President Morin with a very moving speech this morning. We also have the opportunity of meeting the Ministry of European Affairs, Mr. Haddad and Bernard Cazeneuve, and we also are proud of having Mrs. Donna Brazil, a very important figure, a person in the Republican Party, Mr. Caldwell, Mr. Dan White, and other people. So we see that the agenda is packed, maybe too dense, but I hope that we'll get the true food for thought and for the future.
Our dialogues are important, I think, to go through the storm we are living. And I want to thank warmly Jean-Guillaume and Stephanie for opening once again their beautiful castle for our works and our conversations, and to lend us their beautiful enthusiasm for our conversation. Thank you to them. I think we can applaud them. And thanks to Corinne Nassif, who is our new executive director for the Tocqueville Foundation, and who did this with dexterity and courage. And I also want to thank Philippe Gély, who is the executive director, the vice director in charge of international at the Figaro, who is an accomplished and who represents our journal today, and he will close the works. So thank you for being with us today. So dear friends, it might seem quite paradoxical to talk to Europe's moment when we see the stunning sequence in the Middle East and with Israel and the United States, and it is more about the Trump moment or Israel moment, and Europe is quite absent from it. We talk about law and negotiation without having a real power to weigh in, but the choice of the word is interesting here because we are living not only through the emergence of Europe and its time of glory, but more its truth moment. And from this point of view, our conference is a call, an urging call to act, because Europeans, unarmed, vulnerable, have an appointment with history here. When armed forces are imposing in international relationship, we must go beyond former dependency to build this new military power, the autonomous one that Hervé Morin was mentioning earlier. He said that this was the never achieved French dream, and Europe now is against a wall because of external situations and with a worrying internal crisis. And I think it was the Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk who was questioning a few months ago, saying, how do we have 450 million Europeans need about 300 million Americans to help 40 million Ukrainians against Russians? It's true that this paradox, as Hervé Morin said, he pretty much gave us the answer to this question when he said that the number doesn't make power, but sometimes it even creates the unpowerness. As he said, Europe, I'm also convinced, will never be federal. And it will need to raise with the strengthening of nations and their coordination in a more efficient manner. But in order to do that, we must think of the Russian threat, which is sustainable and major, even though by many aspects Russia is weakened and gangrened by the power and the cynicism within its society that is so sick today. And unlike what most leaders thought, the Soviet totalitarianism has never been judged, has not been completely erased. And because there has never been trials of the communism crisis, we have a worrying rejection here, which is the autocratic system of Putin that has kept the methods. And beyond the will to break Ukraine, there is this will to submit Ukraine, and it is anti-Occidental, with former conflicts to solve. It's a serious hybrid war, a long-term war. 46 countries of the Council of Europe who voted for the constitution of non-recognition aggression. This will imply concrete actions to rearm, to vote, to seize the Russian assets that we must use for European defense as well, and orchestrate a much stronger support to Ukraine. Excuse me. Dear friends, the choice of the topic. I'm sorry. So, our conference is called Europe's Moment Between the MAGA Revolution and Russian Revisionism. But if we put Putin and Trump in parallel for this conference, it's not to create equality between the two of them. These are two distinct phenomena. Some analysts see some similarities, worrying, dangerous ones, have led a comparison between the two men, but the challenges that they offer are deeply different. Europe must overcome Putin and digest Trump. Europe remains a democracy. It is still an ally. Debate is open to know what will the Trumpist revolution become, a counter-revolution against the excess of the trans identity in America, or if a larger threat is weighing on American democracy, and we will have many different personalities to talk about these various topics. But Trumpism for Europe is a warning for our democracies, our liberal democracies that are living through a crisis and that we must put back in order. Beyond the debate on how can we overcome tensions between Europe and their nations and its nations to build power, beyond our analysis on our national divisions that I could hear while preparing this conference, it is more and more clear that the challenge of power will not be met if European nations do not manage to solve their deep-rooted internal crisis. As you said, dear Hervé Morin, we won't convince our citizens to make sacrifices needed for our rearming if our politicians do not tackle the internal challenges of Islamism, of insecurities, etc., because the people will not trust their governing bodies, will refuse to believe in them, and will return to a comfortable pacifism. So beyond this political question, I think there is a deeper issue that we will discuss tomorrow in the different panels. It's the question to know, why do European nations refuse to fight? As Hervé Morin said, there is no will. First of all, because we didn't think of the enemy, we didn't identify him, but also because European people are so demoralized, so divided, have lost a sense of who they are. They don't know what they must defend. And if we don't know who we are, why would we fight? And in this perspective, I think transforming our societies into liquid societies, as we say, we need strong anchorage. So faith, family, work, and this has been discredited systematically with forgetting about the European heritage that is so inspiring and so rich, and this could make us react and to really have this wake-up call of this consciousness. So we will talk about this with many politicians and intellectuals tomorrow, and I expect much from these conversations, in particular the last roundtable on the future of European conservatism. This conservatism that seems today quite popular in Europe, is it going to be able to create a liberal conservatism that could transcend, but not getting into totalitarianism that we have seen from the MAGA to the United States? And it's only if Europe finds its base again, its cultural base, that it can morally bounce back and find this citizen spirit to rearm it. So on civic responsibility and moral rearming, I think we must inspire from those who today show an example of a citizen armed nation. There is Israel that we must recognize, despite the criticism we can have on the Gaza issue. We must recognize the strategic courage and the re-establishing of 30 million people that was hurt in 2023 at its core. We must also, us who are looking for inspiring, we can also listen to Ukrainians and see how they bounce back. As Mrs. Sigov from Kiev say very often, they were very much demoralized. giving the impression that the Ukrainian nation was stuck in the post-communist society, and suddenly there was a hidden strength of Ukraine that surged back faced with war. And I'm thinking about yesterday's visit. We have visited a submarine that was a symbol of France's power for a long time. We must make sure that our submarines appear again to meet the challenge that we have. I think we must listen to Tatiana Ogarkova from Ukraine talking about her country last year in Tocqueville. My husband and I often say to each other that the Ukrainian state, still weak, vulnerable, is not our mother. It's more our child. We must care for it. Her testimony, the one of a Ukrainian citizen, mother of 3 daughters, but who spends 1 week every month bringing books and medication to the front lines. Her testimony was so far away from the French vision, which is the fact that we expect everything from the state. It's a good lesson from nations in Europe feeling stuck. I wish you fruitful debates.